Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third edition of Chai and Cocktails. This is produced by Avaaz Media, and this series is sponsored by Somras, whose wonderful cream liquors can help you make both chai and cocktails, depending on what your mood is today. And this evening, we're introducing us to some of our team members. And to start off, have you all got a drink? Have you all got a chai or cocktail? So I've got a cocktail, which is an Indian children's drink called maza, which like all the little kids get. And I put some tequila in it, so it's no longer a children's drink. And that is what I have. What do the others have? Let's hear it. Amisha showed us something.
Yeah, I showed a Samras, and I'm blending it with my coffee. So it's like a chai and a cocktail slash espresso.
That's amazing.
Lots of creative drinks so far.
Yeah, are you even planning to sleep ever?
No. Not when it's a startup. I just don't sleep.
Brianna, I see something.
I'm
What is it?
I'm literally just drinking chai tea, so I'm like I'm on brand, but it's kind of like cinnamon and spices, and it's pretty good.
So you have a chai.
Yes.
What do we have for Ryan?
Coffee, black.
So that's a chai, I think. That's not a cocktail. What does Sim have?
I do this thing now where I mix chai and coffee together. That's that.
That is another chai. Chai is winning. What does Lohanne have?
I have a chai, but I also put it in a porg.
Oh my God.
Look at it. Look at it.
That is a
Look
Brown
at
Geeks
it.
chai.
You're
That
going
is a Brown Geeks chai. So I want to start off with asking each of us who we are and what do we do, especially what do we do on Avaaz and Brown Geeks and what we're working on. So I'll start with Amisha.
Okay, I'm the founder of Avaaz Media, and actually it started off as Brown Geeks, and I'm a writer, producer, also worked in tech, and that's it, and I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm Ryan Riddle. I helped with Amisha to co-found this thing. Amisha and I have been friends for a long time. We won't put a timestamp. No ages here. Let's see. I am a writer. I've been a journalist. I'm currently the executive producer / showrunner of Avaaz's podcast. We Don't Belong Here, co-creating it with Dhugga and Tamara Saeed, that you can currently find on iTunes and anywhere you listen to podcasts. So please listen and leave a review.
It's also on Spotify, I think. I found it on Spotify.
Yeah, it's on Spotify. It's wherever you can find a podcast. So please listen. It's called We Don't Belong Here. And I'm currently working on a TV project in development.
Hey, I'm Sim. As Ryan mentioned, I'm one of the co-creators and co-writers of the podcast, We Don't Belong Here. Please go listen so I can buy new shoes. I'm also creating an animated series for Avaaz, and I'm a writer-director.
At Avaaz, I'm largely a graphic designer. I'm also a writer and filmmaker, and I'm a big fantasy geek, I would say. And that basically covers it.
For Avaaz Media, I'm the marketing manager. I also do our social media. I do a bit of cosplay as well for the geek side of things, and I'm involved with a couple of nonprofits as well.
So I am Mimi. I am the managing editor, and I'm probably the newest person on this Zoom. And so I mostly take care of the writers and the workflow and what we're going to publish. I'm also a science fiction and fantasy writer in my free time. And I do some editing. That's what I was largely doing full-time before here. And I'm still doing some fiction editing, mostly novels. And I write a column in an Indian newspaper called Hindustan Times, which is mostly about, science fiction, fantasy, politics, and culture. So it's like a very interesting mix. And that's what I do. I wanted to get the audience to let us know a little closer, and so I basically wanted to start talking about how our childhoods, how we grew up, what we were enjoying as children, and how you became a geek. Was there like geek culture in your household? Did you pick it up from your friends? How much understanding there is in your culture, in your community? And like, are you a mainstream geek or are you like the person at the corner of the class? Yeah, Amisha.
Can I let others go first? Let me just, I need to just process in my head, just formulate the answer first.
So
Thank
I
you.
will go around the table, like we're sitting at a table, but it's the Zoom table. So Ryan.
When did I realize I was a geek? I can't remember a time when I wasn't a geek. My mom likes to tell this story that ever since I was like 2 years old or about there, whenever the first few bars of the Star Trek theme song would play on TV, I'd run in the room and demand that they not change the channel. And then I would sit there engrossed in watching Star Trek. So I can't remember a time when I wasn't a geek, when there wasn't Star Trek in my life, when there wasn't Superman in my life, which is also right behind me, when I wasn't into comic books, when I wasn't into stories that were big and epic and adventurous and swashbuckling. And I found that in a lot of science fiction primarily. And then as I got older, branching out into things like crime, mystery, noir, that sort of thing. So I can't really pinpoint the exact moment I knew I was a geek. I just know that I always have been.
So you used to just look at non-geek people and be like, weird.
Okay. So just a quick aside story on that. I did. I actually, and I am an athlete, but I wasn't one of those people that was into watching team sports, right? I liked to lift weights. I like to I like to do that part of it, right? I like to actually do. I didn't watch a lot of team sports, but then I would look at them the way they probably looked at Trekkies. Like, I can't understand why they're wearing all these jerseys and hats. And then here I am on the flip side, putting on a Starfleet uniform and going to like San Diego Comic-Con. So yeah, I mean, there was a little bit of that growing up. Like, God, I don't get why they're into sports like that.
Yeah, I'm like, I am normal. They are weird.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm normal. It's normal to put on a piece of spandex and go to a comic convention and pretend to be like Captain Kirk or whatever, right? Superman. And then looking at sports fans going, how can they sit in a stadium for 3 hours and watch people throw a ball around? Meanwhile, I'm stuck in a hot convention center with over thousands of people for hours on end looking at like all this geek stuff. So yeah.
Brianna?
I feel like similar to Ryan, there's never been a point when I wasn't into storytelling specifically. But I was definitely, I think the moment when I realized I was a geek was probably more in my early teens. I was always like, as a kid, I was always into, adventure novels, and I was really into what I would consider science. I wouldn't have really used that word then, but, rent books from the library about bugs and animals and nature and things like that. I was basically always the same person, just smaller. But as a teenager, that was when I realized, because the friends that I was meeting and people I was making friends with were also other geeky people. And so that was when I think I kind of had more of that sense of an identity and got more into fantasy then too. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if I started off as a geek, but definitely stories interested me. So I came to this country when I was 3 or 4. And back in the day, no one sat you down and talk to you or anything. I just sort of hopped on a plane and ended up in a different country, and you're like, what? And I think the way that I made sense of my world was through stories. And I do remember even in kindergarten, as I was learning English, the first thing I did was start to write stories to sort of make sense of the world around me. And even though, of course, I wouldn't frame it like that then. And the stories that most interested me were always the stuff that later on I realized were part of geek culture. Comic books and superheroes. And actually I got in it through science. I was always in the library. So I don't know. We can have this huge debate about what makes a nerd and what makes a geek. Because I was, I think, both. So I would spend my free time in the library. Yay. And to this day, anytime I've lived in several cities, I always think the first thing to do is get your library card. Libraries are wonderful places, and you can do a lot there, actually. People don't know. And so anyway, and there were these books, and the one book was just science, and I remember it was going through the history of science, about just how geometry was discovered, and it just boggled my mind that there were minds like that in the world where they could take like a shadow of a triangle and create mathematics around just those observations. And so the fine line between where science ended and where magic started was very fuzzy for me because, and of course, I wasn't good enough in math to be a physicist, but that was actually, something that I really wanted to do. And
that's in common with me.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, if words are the language of science fiction and fantasy, then math is the language of science, of the universe and making sense of it. So it was just always fascinated me. So, and if you can't tell, I was very shy back then, and I actually was very skilled in dance. I became a professional dancer. I trained at Alvin Ailey when I went to Columbia, and people think that, oh, that makes you popular or cool. No, I was just as much. I was quiet. That's why I could perform in front of 100,000 people. But if I have to talk in front of 2 or 3 or a group, it's the worst. So that's how I got started, and I've always been into it. Like I said, story helps me make sense of the universe, and the universe has been something I love. And I feel like that's what geeks have in common, is they're just fascinated by that kind of stuff.
What was my geek meet cute? I definitely was a reader when I was younger. As a kid, it was easier for me. I'm like an introverted extrovert, so most of the time I needed to gain back my energy. So I spent a lot of time in books, and then I just kind of kept going with that notion of storytelling and stuff like that. And it's actually how I found out my major, because I started off as a psych major in college. And then I realized the reason why I loved psychology so much was because of storytelling, watching TV and movies. So I switched over and went into entertainment that way. But I really liked the different stories that you could get from every facet of entertainment, whether it's TV, movies, books, shorts, animation. It was one of those industries I'm like, oh, you could really do everything and anything. And I just fell in love with the geekdom part of it, watching Justice League when I was younger, reading Harry Potter, reading all those magical books and stuff like that. That's where I kind of fell in love with it. It was a very easy escape. And where I live, there's not too many fun things for kids to do besides going outside and playing games. I'm like, ugh, exercising? Nah, let me just read this book.
So I was actually labeled as a tomboy when I was younger, which I feel like is a term people don't like using anymore, but that's a whole other conversation. But I used to love action figures, and when we'd go to McDonald's, I would whisper to my sister to ask my mom to get me the action figure toy, not the Barbie. And I love video games. So that was kind of my introduction into geekdom. And then when I got older, I'm a Pisces, and we are known to be escapists. So, diving into books and comics and in worlds that don't exist, that kind of, I think, is why I fell in love with anything geeky. I will say, I for a long time, I never labeled myself as a geek because I felt like you had to know so much about whatever, Star Trek, Star Wars, and I've never known facts or, little oh, I could tell you about this side character. So I feel like that always turned me away from being oh yeah, I'm a geek. But I always just loved all that stuff.
I want to add to some of those. So I grew up in Calcutta in India. So I'm a Bengali, and the Bengali literature, the canon of Bengali literature is what I read as a kid. My parents were very restrictive, so I was always supposed to I was at home a lot, and I was given all the books to read. So in Bengali literature, there's no division between realism and supernatural fiction. So this, all the major authors who have written really serious novels and so on have also just thrown in a ghost or something in many of their fiction, and that's what I grew up reading. So this is interesting. I can say that content wise I was always a geek, but geek was also such a tremendously Western concept which had not really permeated in like all parts of India when I was young, which is like 30 years ago. So I didn't know I was a geek. And when I first met like other kids from other schools, maybe in my early teens, who called themselves nerds, or like I met people on the internet because the internet happened right around the time. And I didn't think I was a geek or a nerd for like the same reasons that Sim mentions. I was like they're into these very specific things, which I like, franchises or like authors who were not always available in India. So I was like, I am into these themes, but I don't know if I'm that identity for a very long time. So like I hung around in magical realism for a very long time because magical realism had like seeped into India in my late teens. And then I was an English grad, so I'm educated in literary fiction because that's what English departments really teach you. So I had to I had a very roundabout journey in like the middle of my 20s or something where I'm like, yeah, I am a science fiction writer. And that is how I kind of came in. Like I'm a fake geek by a lot of people's standards, but I'm also producing content. So I guess I'm a legit geek in some ways. And that's where I want to cue into all of us talking about some of our other work. Like we've already mentioned that, we do a lot of other things on like science fiction, fantasy, and geek verticals. And I want to take the opportunity for all of you to talk about your other work that you do.
As founder of a startup, I don't really do anything else. I have a daughter, so I try to parent, at least check in every once in a while. Yeah, I think that it's very important though for I started off as a writer producer, and what really impassioned me was not just like what's traditionally known as geek, which is one of the reasons like I started like, I want Brown Geek to not just be like, I think some of us said we never felt geek enough, like imposter geeks. Well, I actually started off because I love art stuff. Like I was into Bengali films. I knew, my first job was at Miramax, and they were like back then just amazing with foreign films. So Cinema Paradiso and like all of these, I just Guillermo del Toro I love, and Alfonso Cuarón and all of this. And the thing of geekdom is when you geek out over something is to deep dive into subjects. So that's my deep dive. And like in order for me to find the thing to keep me going during that long hour startup requires is I am working on a pilot and developing one, and it's based on a play that I wrote and it has that magical realism. It has everything I love. So it keeps me in touch with why I started the company. It's ultimately not about like the organization or whatever it is. It's about like what inspires you can get so lost in everyday stuff you have to do. And so I do try to make it, that's the only other thing I'm sort of working on. But other than this company, there's no big project that I'm doing. But it's a pilot that I love, and I hope to, make it part of this company culture. So let's see what happens.
Well, I already plugged the podcast, which once again, we don't belong here. iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, leave a review. Sim's got to buy some new shoes. So please listen so we can make more of them. As for other projects, I currently am helping develop a anthology series with a bunch of other writers. We have a writer's room going. We're putting together pitch material, stuff like that. It's a crime noir show. I don't want to talk about it too much, but it basically is a crime noir, but it's an anthology series. So every episode is a different story. I also have a couple of pilots that I had written that I kind of put away that I hope to revisit. One I want to turn into a mid to low budget science fiction feature instead of a TV series. I think with like stuff like The Expanse and Star Trek Discovery, my enthusiasm to want to write a science fiction show that would fill a void has been met by actual Hollywood. So they're now producing when I wrote the pilot, there were no space shows anymore on TV, right? There had been like this, blank space after Star Trek had gone off the air for, the umpteenth time. So I wanted to write one. So now I want to turn it into a feature. And then I have a couple of other writing projects that I have going on.
What am I working on besides a podcast? Because yes, new shoes, please. And my dog would like fancy treats moving forward. I love animation, and that kind of is the genre that I used to just write live action, and then realized I love animation, and that's all I've been writing now. I have a adult animated pilot in development that's based off of a relationship that's now with an ex, so that's fun to work on. And then another adult animated pilot with a friend of mine, and then another kids animated thing. So again, all animation. I just want to make animated content moving forward and direct live action, and that's what I'm hoping works out.
I have my debut fantasy novel coming out next summer. It's called City of Reckoning. It's very dark. And then I had my editorial debut just this year. So I directed a Lovecraftian comedy web series. Actually, the mug that I've been drinking out of is actually branding from it.
Oh,
but
can you bring it closer? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's called The Cultist. It's on YouTube. It's very, very ridiculous, and it's dark humor if you like dark humor. But yeah, and I mean, those are the main things right now. We're getting ready to do a second season of that, so I'm going to be writing that soon.
It's always the hard part to be in a room full of creators. I guess I'm like always just adjacent. I'm like the person who will do a podcast episode on your work or write something on it or just geek out like I'm the fan, being in the marketing and social space. Other projects that I typically work on throughout the year is right now I'm trying to launch a new podcast, like a sequel to my other podcast. And I put on like panels for different organizations, and they always skew geek. But I mean, in this day and age for like, you know, editors, screenwriters, and that kind of stuff, like who hasn't worked on a Marvel film, who hasn't worked on a DC thing? So that's how I like do my geek side of things. Otherwise, I'm just like a professional fan at this point.
So I write fiction, as I mentioned. I mostly have short stories out. My novelette, which is just a slightly long short story called His Footsteps Through Darkness and Light, was a Nebula nominee this year, and I was stunned. Most of my short fiction is online on my website or different places. I am now writing, like I'm in the middle of 2 or 3 projects which are all just before announcements, so I can't announce them. There's a group novel with me and some other South Asian writers. It's like an adventure that happens in colonial India, and I'm really excited about that. I'm also writing a little for a game, which is a very new scene for me, but it's again very fun. It takes a lot of historical research, and I really, really love historical research. Like that is my geek zone. I have read so much history that no one needs, none of my projects need, because that's what I do for fun. So that's mine. And here's the next question, which is actually a Q&A from, you know, things that many of you said, Ryan said, you know, Lohanne said. So the science fiction and fantasy space, it feels like it's going through like this golden age of like, you know, diverse expansion, like any way that you mean diverse. Like I don't usually like saying diverse to describe one person. Like I'm a diverse person, that's weird. But just the range of people who were not there in the industry before, like, you know, even a company like Avaaz or Brown Geeks, like didn't exist when I was a kid, right? And that is not the dream that I had. That's not what I thought I would be doing growing up, because those careers didn't exist, right? And so what I wanted to do, or what I wanted to ask basically, is that I'd like you to talk about how like this expanding of horizon has like changed your beliefs and about your work and what you think you can do as opposed to what you thought you could do in the past. You know, how do we get here in our career? Like what are the things that we did that made us this person? Like, you know, I mean, like I was in academia for a long time because I thought that's what I would do. Like I thought I would be an editor, and I was at Penguin India, but I was editing literary fiction because that's what India largely produces. And then I went into academia, and I thought very reluctantly that I would become a professor. I was not really about that life, but I was like, you know, with my skill set, that is the biggest job option, which is a tremendously sad thing to say. Adjuncts don't get jobs. But that was still like my biggest job area. I just want to hear all your thoughts on that. Should I start with Amisha?
I'm the worst career advice person because I have such a meandering career path. So I would like to reassure anyone with that kind of meandering career path that you will be okay. It will all be okay. Because I've
That's
often
what
done.
sorry,
Yeah,
that's
go
what I
ahead.
actually want to hear though. That's like all the non-related, quote unquote, non-related things that you did. How have they made you this person? So,
Well, I started off in journalism, and I really realized I don't want to report on stories. I want to create stories. I would have done very well in 2020 because there's really hardly any difference. So that's when I went to film because I've always loved film and TV, but I never grew up thinking you could actually make that into a career. And when I went into film and TV, there was none, zero South Asians. Like I think Mira Nair had come out with a film, like maybe that's it. And so actually, my first short film that I wrote and directed won Best Dramatic Short at IAC. I think now it's called something else right now in New York. And Mira Nair presented me with my prize. So that was like full circle of life a little bit. And I just never did, like, when I was in a film studio, you're supposed to start as an assistant and then just sort of go up the ladder until you become an executive and then a producer, whatever it is. And I didn't choose that. I just did something else which excited me. And that's just sort of how I've always gone through life. Like, what is the next thing that's going to challenge and excite me? And I can say that there are pros and cons, as always, to everything. Because what happens is if you are goal focused and you are like sort of here, like linear in your career path a little bit, have the patience and acquire skills and a network. Really more important than skills, I would say. It's like not the whole like who you know. It is actually who you know, but not like in a sense of like you need to know big people, but just the network of people you surround yourself with and the opportunities and sort of the stamp you get. That being said, I didn't choose that path and it's okay, and so that's why I went to India. I lived in different countries. I went where the jobs took me, different cities. And that produced another type of resilience in me. I think everything has its, and I think doing that makes you very innovative. It makes you very quick to adapt. It makes you very quick, not just to situations, but to personalities and people. Yeah. And so, and actually everything I did, so working in entertainment, film, I was a playwright. So, when you're a writer and producer, often you're freelancing or you have periods when you're not working. So I would work on ad campaigns. And I sort of leveraged all that I had learned into tech for a little while. And so this is why, like, what I'm doing now is the perfect marriage of tech and entertainment and media and sort of bringing all of that into play.
For me, I just wanted to, from an early age, I knew I wanted to be a storyteller of some kind, whether it had been a comic book artist. I used to spend hours just drawing as a child, or making up stories. Or, as my mom likes to say, I used to actually put on a blazer in my diapers and actually try to report on the news from the coffee table. I don't know if that's true. It's just one of her stories. Growing up Filipino American, I got told there was really only two career paths for me. That was either I went into the medical profession or I went into the military. Well, let me retract that a little bit. I wasn't told that, but it was severe. It was strongly suggested by my mother that I choose one of those two things for my career, because the third world country, for her, stability is everything. And the moment I told her I wanted to be a writer, she told me that I was going to starve to death because it was a very unstable profession. And when someone tells me I can't do a thing, then I want to immediately do the thing and prove them wrong. So I actually didn't have any lofty ideas about my career when I started out. My only thing is that I had to be paid. I just had to be a professional writer. I had to be paid. That was it. I didn't have any lofty goals. I was going to write the next great American novel or anything like that. I mean, I had dreams of that, but the basic goal was to just get paid. So I went into TV news at first, which I completely hated. Got out of that quickly. Got an MFA in creative writing, taught for a while, wrote a novel, which is now in my closet, never to see the light of day. It's a horrible first novel. A lot of early first novel mistakes. And that wasn't the form I really wanted. I wanted to write television. But there was one lesson that I took with me throughout my career path when I went back to journalism, went to newspapers after I got my MFA, won 3 awards for my investigative, worked in marketing and editing and all sorts of stuff like that, which I also did not enjoy. But I got through all that. The one thing I knew I wanted to do was write TV and film, screenplays, teleplays. That format spoke to me in a way that no other format could. And the ability to reach an audience. But the one lesson I carry through all my work is just do the work, right? That's the basic tenet of my working advice. And that came to me as a 17-year-old. I asked a screenwriter, J. Michael Straczynski, who worked on shows like He-Man, the original, was co-creator of the original She-Ra, created Babylon 5, which was like my jam back in high school. But as a 17-year-old, I got to ask him, I go, how does one become a professional writer? Because that's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to get paid, right? Whether it be film, TV, journalism, whatever. And he just said, there are no secret handshakes. There are no under the table deals. There's no, the first thing that you have to do to get started is just do the work, right? You have to prove that you can do the work. And then if you do the work, you're going to get better at doing the work. And eventually someone's going to notice. I know I'm not going to dismiss that there is a component of networking and all of this stuff that goes along with that. But the very basic, and I also give this advice to anyone who asks me, how do I become a writer? How do I get into the creative space? Do the work. Keep doing the work, getting better at doing the work, and eventually someone is going to notice. And here I am in my mid-40s, still doing the work, trying to get noticed to get to the next level, right? I've had success in some of the other stuff that I've done, and now I'm continually reinventing what I'm writing and what I'm doing. Who knows, maybe in 10 years from now, I'll be writing novels again.
To Amisha's point, everything will be okay, just keep going. I think that's been my biggest lesson overall. But I didn't go to film school. I got a degree in psychology, but I've always known I want to tell stories. I come from a very creative family, and I think that kind of creativity was always buzzing around. But I started out as an assistant. I worked for a horrible producer who made The Matrix. It was not fun, but I eventually became an executive at a small studio. So I've done, the assistant to coordinator, to executive, to producer, and now back on production again. And I've done all the things I've never wanted to do, which is all the background bullshit, when I really wanted to write and direct. It wasn't, honestly, I've been in the industry for over 7 years now, I think. And it wasn't until this year that I finally started making things that people would read, or even getting attention for anything I wrote. And honestly, the change was I just decided to take risks. Instead of being precious about my work and thinking it's not ready, no one's gonna like this, I very stubbornly decided I have a voice, I have something to say, and I want to tell stories, so I'm just gonna do it. And started sharing my scripts with people. And I've had the producer who's on my adult animated thing, his first response to me in an email when I sent it to him was, it's not ready, but I see you have potential. And that was enough for me to be like, you know what, tell me what to do to fix it, and I'll fix it. He gave me notes, I fixed it, and then he was like, all right, I'm gonna pick this up. Stubborn, I knew I wanted to say something, so I just, honestly, my biggest advice is share your work. Because at the end of the day, you will find someone who connects to you, you will find someone who wants to champion you and wants to help you. And if you don't share your work, you're just gonna be stuck thinking you're not good enough, when at the end of the day, everyone has a story that they can share and should share.
My journey is a little bit of like each of what you guys have been describing, like I've been in social, I've been in marketing, I've been an event producer and assistant. Like my career path kind of meandered, but all those skills kind of helped me have an edge over other people in certain workplaces because they did a very direct route and I hustled a lot, because the biggest thing I heard from my school when I went to Cal State Fullerton is like, you can be very picky about the stuff you do, but realize when you're picky, you can't, that's the only thing you can do. That's the only thing you're going to end up doing. So, and which is fine if you want to just do the one thing, it's great. But for me, I wasn't really sure. So I took a couple of different paths in order to kind of arrive to what I want and didn't want. Like I said earlier, I went in as a psych major, realized I only like psychology because I watched so many movies. And my journey, it very much started in internships, like that traditional route. I took an internship at a film festival. I got in at a very lucky time when somebody was leaving, and I was doing that hard work. I did more. I thought about the projects they gave me, and I'm like, okay, I did it your way, but I also have this suggestion. So through doing those things, I was able to get more from that internship that turned it into a coordinator position, that turned it into a director position. And at one point I was working with, as a geek, I was working with the editors from Star Wars. I was working with screenwriters who did really big films, and I didn't think that was possible for me. But what really made me go I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna put my foot down and see how far I can get, was just conversations like this that I had from my school, that I had from different events that I went to, where I saw people like me that you don't always get to see on screen, because people decide who gets to be on screen and who doesn't. But when I went to these other things, they're like, yeah, we're here too. Obviously executives don't get to be the person on E! News or at Comic-Con on the main stage. But when you end up at these events, you got to see the more representation. You got to see somebody's like, yeah, I've been here 10 years. I worked on that film too. I'm just sitting in the back or something like that. So that's a lot of how I started, was just going to these things, seeing other people, realizing I can do it too, and trying on different hats to see which one fit and which one I liked. And I realize I'm a fashionista and I like trying on different hats.
So for me, again, I'm kind of a mix of things, right? So I'm a graphic designer and a novelist and a film director. And initially I was going to go to film school. But when I was 17, I had a mentor at the time, an indie filmmaker that I was interning for. And he sat me down with me and my parents, and he was like, don't go to film school, not if you want to be a director. Because he's like, I did that. I went through Hollywood. It was a waste of time. I went, he did all that stuff, but that wasn't what helped him actually get to be where he wanted to be. And he initially recommended that I do something that would help me be a storyteller, some sort of degree that would help with that. And at the time I was like, about graphic design, because I was kind of doing that as a hobby at the time, just for fun. And he was like, I guess that could also work. So I ended up studying basically my hobby as a career. And that has been very helpful, because I've been able to, make money while I'm still working on things that my passions have been on the side, basically until recently. To the other point of the question about the sort of the change in media being a lot more diverse, I feel like for me, the first, because as I mentioned, when I was a teenager, I got really into fantasy novels, and I went really deep into that for 10 years or whatever. And I got to this point where I got really bored. I feel like I had that feeling maybe a year or two before the book industry started to really shift. And it was kind of cool. It felt like my desires had just suddenly been manifested. Because I was like, man, all of these stories are there's so much the same kind of worlds that keep being created. And I really wanted to see something different. And I remember also kind of having this awareness of yeah, there's a lot of the same types of heroes that we see a lot too. And I didn't always feel necessarily I was represented either, but I also was saying a lot of my friends, I don't really see people like them as heroes a lot. And then I kind of got introduced to the discourse around this, and that was pretty cool. And so that was, I would say, around 2016, 2017 or so. I guess a little bit before that, when you were seeing a lot of change in the book industry, and that was really exciting. But that was also when I got on Twitter and started hearing other people talk about all these different issues with representation. So then I got to go a lot more deeply into that. And what I ended up doing at that time was I started a Twitter chat called Females in Fantasy. And that was just an opportunity for me to also bring other people in to share their experiences and different, forms of representation that they were hungering for, and have a conversation about that. And I was able to learn a lot about it, but I also realized that there was a lot more to the topic. And so I created a podcast. and Amisha can speak on this, but I think the reason why she ended up finding me was through that podcast. And so I think the lesson from there is that, like, if you have something that you're passionate about, if you have something that you need to say, like, I think you need to go out and say it, like, make it clear to the world, like, this is who I am, this is what I care about. And that people will, you'll draw people to you that share the same interests and that share the same goals. Working here at Avaaz Media is the first time that I've been able to have, like, my industry trade, which is graphic design, merge with the things that I'm also passionate about. So that's been really exciting. But yeah, that would be my lesson there. And that's kind of like, that also tells you a little bit about about how my journey got me here too.
Listening to all of you, what I really, Lohanne, did you have a point?
Yeah, I realized that I wanted to speak to a certain end of it, like I guess on the executive or behind the scenes people, not on the creators end of things, for the representation, because I realized I talked about it from my perspective, but for then on, I think we're seeing a lot of conversation around like what we've been talking about too, like who's creating these stories, but also like who's greenlighting these things, because I really don't think we've caught up to the exact place that we really should be in 2020. Like we're getting a lot of on-screen representation, but like who's configuring these things at the studios? Because something that still like shocks me is like, I know where to go to see these people, right? But in certain areas in this country, especially where like entertainment isn't a part of the everyday culture, like in LA, you can just walk by and see someone filming or something. But those who are interested in going to school, I have a lot of schools in my area, they don't know that like people like them are in the event space or the executive level. And that's what I learned from college, because when I was putting on my programming, I had a vision. I'm like, I'm going to have so many diverse people in the careers in entertainment. I'm going to have so many diverse people. And I hate to say diverse, but that's like our version, like the entertainment industry's version. I heard it somewhere of like thoughts and prayers.
So
like we just say diversity
people,
inclusive.
If it's many people, diverse is fine.
Yeah.
If it's one person, because diverse literally means many different kinds. So one person being a diverse person, my editor brain goes, object to
but
that.
how it's used in the industry, it's just like, just diversity, inclusivity, and you're just like, okay, but do you know what you're saying behind that? But I had like an aha moment where I kind of felt full circle of what I experienced in college, seeing like a huge executive person going, I was one of the people on Princess and the Frog. I hired some people, I got that, helped that greenlit, and I was one of the main stakeholders. When I was putting on my programs, I had these different people speaking about working on a film. And then I had like a group of young women come up to me from different backgrounds, and they're like, hey, did you put this on? I'm like, yeah, I did. And they're like, they have you running it? And I was like, did I do well? And they're like, no, we just didn't think, because the area I'm in isn't very, once again, diverse. They're just like, oh, we didn't know we could have jobs like this. And I was like, oh, you can come intern, because I was like, I have that opportunity, come intern for me, and let's get this going. Let's get the next generation, make sure as we're going forward, we're reaching back.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I never wanted, like growing up, diversity and inclusion wasn't that buzzwords that it is now. And even now, as Lohanne stated, it's often a buzzword and not really much else. And I think especially if you're in the creative field, in any field, whether you're a designer, writer, editor, whatever, musician, artist, for me, I never wanted, like, even when I thought of the word, when I was like, oh, brown geek, I didn't want it to become something finite. I didn't want it to be limiting. That's like sort of like our tagline in a way, like, why be limited in a genre which has limitless universes and stories, right? However, what I realized is there's you, but then there's the world which is interacting with you. And you would be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't understand how people are interacting with you. And in fact, it actually can enrich your world to, if you so choose to focus on that in your creative work, that aspect of your identity, great. Whichever aspect of your identity you want to focus on, you totally can, right? If you don't, that's fine too. But at the least, you are making an informed decision, right? Because I think it's sort of like a maturity thing. When you're younger, like I remember, I went to a high school and it never occurred to me people may not like me because I wasn't Christian or white. But because I wasn't aware, I didn't have the skills and tools to understand the dialogue happening around me, right? And same in the workplace. You don't have to make everything about it. And not everybody around you is talking about it either. Like you don't have, however, like for example, like I'm learning in the startup world, women receive less than 3% of the total funding last year. Forget, and women of color even less, okay? So that is abysmal. And that's actually a historic high, 3%. And if you don't know that, you're going to constantly think, I'm doing something wrong. I'm not getting it. I'm not, why, right? When actually there is an industry, there is a systemic problem within it. You don't have to focus on that. You don't have to hang your hat on it. You just have to operate within it and know that these are the rules that you're going to play by. If you don't know the rules, like sometimes you can just traverse the rule because you're lucky or whatever. But to me, it's important to know that those things, that dialogue exists. Like Brianna was talking about, that as she delved into it, she realized, wow, there's a whole world opening up, and that inspired her to do a podcast, right? So I'd be curious if anybody knows what I'm talking about. And
no, I am totally like, vibing with what you're talking about, because I would have summed up with something like that. Because like what I heard from all five of you and what I really, really appreciated is like there's this huge, huge sense of positivity and expansion. Like, you can do things. There are people you can reach out to. It's possible, right? Like there are hurdles. It's possible. We're talking about our mentors. We're talking, like Lohanne talked about, like, there are people who pull us up, and then we pull other people up. And like there's this whole process of can do, which is not something I received as a child. Like, I was growing up in India, middle class. Like I was not poor. I don't claim having grown up poor, but my parents were poor when they were children. And so I always heard no's, and they were probably saying no from goodwill, right? They just said, don't take risks because you'll not be able to feed yourself, and we will not be able to feed you later, right? So they were like, this is a weird dream. Like this is an impossible dream. Nobody does that. Who does that? Like who do we even know that does that, right?
And we all, that's a huge point. By the way, we all talk about diversity in an ethnic or racial sense or something. But first of all, gender is the biggest one. Then you can get intersectional about it at all. And even, I would say perhaps as big or bigger is economic. You can't just roll, like, when I started at Miramax, there were a lot of people. And I was like, how are they like doing this job? And I had to like, try to find a second job or whatever. And there's no starving artist. I don't know. I think that's like a myth, because you cannot create when you're worried about how you're going to pay rent. Maybe some people can.
I totally experienced that actually. Like even like a couple of years back, because, I was transitioning as a grad student here, and then I was going into the job market, and well, the presidency had just changed, and a lot of people were not sure about giving jobs to immigrants because they didn't know if immigrants could actually work for them. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, I'm qualified, I'm not getting a job. There were a few months where I'm just like, if I don't know if I can pay rent, I can't think of a novel. Like some people actually said that, well, you're sitting around, why don't you finish your novel now? No, I'm not sitting around. I'm sitting around dying.
It's true. It's when we talk about diversity or being inclusive, I feel like we leave out certain things because we're so focused on just one aspect of it often. But the very first thing is like, can you even take that internship? There's a lot of people who can take $12 an hour or a free internship, and other people can't, and that got them in the door to doing other things. And, when we say who you don't have to know Steve Spielberg or whatever it is, but just like, oh, my mom's neighbor. Who your mom's neighbor or your dad, like who your neighbor is like just look around and that can be like, oh yeah, why don't you have a summer job at my place, and that gets you in the door. Like, because when I was younger, I often compared myself. How did this person, like, did I not work hard enough? Am I not good enough? And sometimes you're not. Sometimes you just got to up your skills, up your experience, up your everything, okay? That doesn't let you off the hook, as far as I'm concerned, about upping your craft. But there's also all these other things going on.
Okay, so I think we've come to the end of this conversation, and this was lovely. I feel like I know all of you better now. I worked with you all these days, and I know you better now, and it's amazing. I think it will also add to our work ethic. And so basically, I'm going to thank our audience for joining us this evening as well. And I hope you stay with us as we build up Avaaz Media and Brown Geeks in the next few months. And what you can do immediately is come and join us on social media. So we are on Twitter, where we're Avaaz Media _. So there's an underscore after Avaaz Media. Instagram is Avaaz Media, just that, no underscore. Facebook is Avaaz Space Media. You can, if you type that in, I think, with the first result. And we also have a fairly active Discord called Brown Geeks, and that's where we kind of keep having these chats. So if you want to, come in, talk to us more about these thoughts and other things, and also talk to each other, share your art, share your conversation. That is a great place to be, and we're pretty much always there. So that is it. And yeah, we'd love to see you there. Thank you so much again. Stay safe and stay geeky. Good evening.